1 second she was in control. Calm, clipped, practiced. The next, her crew phone blinked red with an international override alert. She'd never seen that screen before, and she'd been with Ventura Sky for 11 years. She tapped the alert. A Zurich-based operations line appeared. Then a second number, this one from Geneva. Then London Heathrow, each listed under a tag she didn't recognize. Path Sync Tier 3, GEP Ethics Node Lock. The crew phone started buzzing. So did the cockpit line. So did the gate dispatch tablet. Melissa glanced back at Marilyn, still seated in 3A. Still calm, still unreadable. She wasn't typing, she wasn't dialing, she wasn't moving, but somehow everything was moving around her. Meanwhile, First Officer Brendan Hill walked briskly out of the cockpit, head down, confusion written across his face. "Melissa," he said quietly, "we just got a freeze from Zurich AirNav Control. They've flagged our flight as pending ethics review. They want confirmation that someone named Dorsey is on board." Melissa stiffened. "Dorsey?" "Yeah, Marilyn Dorsey. Passenger manifest confirms she's in first." He paused, then added, "You know who that is, right? In row 4C, the man with the platinum lapel pin, who'd snickered about maintenance staff." Sat up straighter. His ears perked at the name. "Wait, Dorsey? As in Path Sync Dorsey?" Marilyn turned slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You remember now?" The man blinked. He looked from Marilyn to the cockpit, then to Melissa, then back again. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Melissa's eyes narrowed. "Who is she?" Brendan glanced around, lowered his voice. "She's not just some tech exec. She chairs the GEP Council. She's the reason Ventura Sky is even authorized to fly into Heathrow after 2022. You remember the ethics review last fall? That was hers." Melissa's face lost color. Just then, the cockpit intercom lit up. A calm female voice, accented and clipped, spoke directly to the entire cabin. "Attention crew. Zurich Control confirms ethics violation flag on Flight 221. Passenger number 3A verified as International Protocol Authority. Please stand by." The speaker clicked off. The cabin went silent. Dead silent. Row by row, passengers turned their heads. Some looked confused. Some leaned forward. Others, they just stared at Marilyn. Not because of what she had said, but because of what she hadn't had to. A woman in 2B, earlier so quick to clutch her purse, now shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Across the aisle, a young man traveling with his father whispered, "Isn't she the one who shut down Marseille terminal for ethics failure last year?" The father nodded slowly. Melissa took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Miss Dorsey," she began. But Marilyn raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to pause her. "You've already made the mistake. Don't try to fix it with tone now." Brendan turned to Melissa. "Zurich says our departure is now suspended until direct communication from GEP is received. JFK and Heathrow are mirroring the suspension." Another tone buzzed, this time from the gate tablet near the door. The screen read, "Landing right suspended. JFK, LHR, ZRH, NRT pending ethics verification under GP Protocol 6. The man in 4C leaned across the aisle. "This flight isn't going anywhere." Melissa swallowed hard. "This is a misunderstanding. She didn't say she was—" Brendan cut her off. "She didn't have to." Then came the ripple, the quiet gasp, the collective realization spreading down the rows. People weren't whispering about why this was happening anymore. They were wondering how far it would go. In the galley, a junior crew member whispered, "Can she really shut down 4 airports like that?" Brendan answered without hesitation, "She doesn't shut them down. She just makes them stop trusting us." Row 6C. A woman in a gray pantsuit pulled out her phone and started Googling Marilyn Dorsey Ventura Sky. Row 5A. A man leaned back in his seat, muttered, "That's what happens when people think power looks a certain way." Melissa looked back at Marilyn, who still hadn't stood up. "You could have told us," she said. quieter now. Marilyn tilted her head, as if the question was beneath her. "And if I had, would you have treated me differently?" Melissa opened her mouth, then shut it, because the answer was obvious. In the back of the cabin, another attendant whispered to a colleague, "She just sat there, and now we're locked out of Zurich." The colleague replied, "I don't even think she raised her voice." Marilyn finally turned, speaking not to Melissa this time, but to the entire first-class cabin. "I didn't need to announce myself. I needed to see who you were when you thought I didn't matter." A soft ding rang from her tablet. She glanced at it once. Elena's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Ms. Dorsey, Zurich has confirmed operational lockdown at 4 airports. FAA has been notified. Heathrow Compliance Board has issued a soft freeze on Ventura Sky's European privileges pending review." Marilyn's eyes remained steady. Melissa stepped back, stumbled slightly. The balance had shifted, and everyone felt it. Row 3C, platinum pin, finally whispered. She didn't raise her voice, but she just raised the price of our mistake. You could hear it in the way the champagne tray stopped clinking. First class, once an exclusive cocoon of quiet entitlement, now hung in uneasy silence. Nobody reached for their monogrammed tote bags. Nobody sipped from their crystal. The air had changed, and everyone felt it. The woman they'd all ignored, dismissed, or quietly questioned. She hadn't moved. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't touched her phone except to press one button, and now 4 major airports weren't taking Ventura Sky flights. "Jesus," someone whispered. Maybe 5B, maybe 3C. It didn't matter. The truth had landed. Marilyn Dorsey, PathSync founder, GEP ethics chair, holder of the international access switch most airlines didn't even know could be flipped from inside the cabin. No one knew what to say to her now. Even the bold ones stayed quiet. The first officer hadn't returned. The crew had stopped pouring. The energy in the cabin had shifted from disdain to dread. And Marilyn? Still sitting there, like she owned the plane, because in every way that mattered, she did. A young woman a few rows back adjusted her glasses, leaned toward her seatmate. "Is she really the Marilyn Dorsey? Like PathSync Dorsey?" "She doesn't just run it," her seatmate murmured. "She built it. Every airport you've flown through in the past 5 years. She made the system that tells pilots when and where to land. And she chairs the ethics council that grades airline behavior." Silence. Then the younger woman said it. "Then why the hell was she treated like staff?" Melissa, the lead flight attendant, stood near the galley, staring at the crew phone like it might tell her how to rewind the last 10 minutes. She'd been in tight spots before. Difficult passengers, tech glitches, delays. But this was the one thing training manuals didn't cover. What happens when the passenger you dismissed owns the system you're part of? Marilyn finally moved, just her shoulders straightening, her gaze lifting. She turned her head, looked directly at Melissa. "You made a mistake." Melissa swallowed. "Ma'am, I didn't realize." "That's the problem." The sentence wasn't loud, but it echoed. You could feel it land in every row. Elena's voice crackled in her earpiece. In 2A, an older white man with a Rolex adjusted his cuffs and leaned slightly into the aisle. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Ms. Dorsey, if I may, I just want to apologize for not saying something sooner." Marilyn looked at him, unmoved. "What would you have said?" He blinked. "Well, I saw how they treated you. I should have, but you didn't." Another silence. "So you're not apologizing for what you did," Marilyn said. "You're apologizing for getting caught in the fallout." The man slowly sank back into his seat. Row 3C, Mr. Platinum Lapel Pin, had gone quiet too. The same man who had whispered, "You people," was now practically folding himself into the window, trying to disappear. Marilyn didn't look at him. He wasn't worth the energy. The younger flight attendant, Jenna, approached cautiously. Her hand trembled slightly, but she carried a bottle of water and a glass. "Ms. Dorsey," she said, voice tight, Would you care for some still water? It's chilled. We apologize for earlier. Marilyn accepted it without speaking. Because dignity isn't about volume. It's about knowing who you are. She took a sip, then finally said, "Where was this energy 15 minutes ago?" Jenna bit her lip. "I don't have an excuse." "Then don't offer one." Passengers were murmuring again, not gossiping this time. They were reassessing. A woman in 5A pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "She wrote the gate fare protocol draft last year," she said to her partner. "That's the ethics charter all US-bound airlines had to sign to retain landing rights." The partners shook their head, and they told her to sit in business class. In the cockpit, the pilot was on his headset. "Zurich Command, confirm hold status." A pause. Then, "Ventura 221, your departure is currently suspended. Ethics Protocol Tier 3 lock is active. No override authorized. GEP directive enforced." The pilot turned to Brendan, the first officer. "Call corporate." Brendan didn't move. "What's the point?" he said. "She is corporate." Back in 3A, Marilyn checked her tablet. A soft ping. Elena's voice in her earpiece. "Heathrow and JFK have now published public-facing hold statements. Media will pick it up within the hour." Marilyn spoke calmly. "Good. Let the press cover the silence before the storm." Elena replied, "Gate fare protocol enforcement authorization now live. You may proceed with in-flight citation if you choose." Marilyn tapped the screen, flagged 3 names: Melissa, Mr. Lapel Pin, and the captain. Then she spoke out loud. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said clearly but without aggression, "this flight is currently being held due to an ethics compliance failure. The good news is, the failure is not yours, but you witnessed it, and what we witness in silence becomes our reflection." She looked around, eyes locked with hers now, no longer in defiance, but in recognition. "I built systems to catch misconduct," she continued. "I never imagined I'd trigger one. From the seat it was built to protect." She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply existed, unapologetically. For the first time in 35,000 feet of sky, Marilyn Dorsey didn't need altitude to stand tall. The system would do that for her. And for the first time in their lives, first-class passengers learned what it looked like when a woman didn't scream to be heard. She simply let the world go silent around her. The thing about silence is that it doesn't last, not when people are afraid. By the time the Zurich hold entered its 10th minute, panic was seeping in around the edges of first class. Not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. Subtle looks, shuffling hands, brows furrowed over passports. All of it hung beneath the surface like a pressure change before turbulence. Captain Rowan Hadley stepped out of the cockpit. He was calm, but his knuckles were pale where they gripped the wall near the galley. He locked eyes with Melissa. "Zurich wants confirmation of passenger 3A's credentials." Melissa's lips parted. "I told you already. She's listed under a third-party contract. We flagged it at boarding." Brendan, the first officer, shook his head as he walked up beside them. "You didn't just flag her. You escalated her. You called in a verification denial with language that triggered a Tier 3 ethics alert. And now, they want blood." Melissa looked toward 3A. Marilyn Dorsey sat upright, unshaken, tablet in hand, calm in presence, unreadable in expression. Brendan added, "And yes, that is Marilyn Dorsey, chairwoman of the Global Ethics Protocol Board and the lead architect of PathSync. She's not just a passenger, she's the compliance system." Captain Hadley muttered something that didn't need to be heard. It wasn't profanity, but it might as well have been. Back in the cabin, murmurs had turned into soft panic. A businessman in 2D leaned toward a flight attendant. "Are we taking off or not?" "Is this a security threat?" a woman in 4B whispered. She didn't look dangerous, but "She owns the system," someone said behind them. "The system? You think this is about a seat?" Melissa moved forward, slowly, as if wading into a courtroom. She crouched beside Marilyn. Ms. Dorsey, we need to verify your identity with Zurich Control. They've asked for confirmation. Marilyn looked down at her tablet, then up. You had no trouble deciding I didn't belong when you assumed I was nobody. Melissa flinched. And now that you suspect I am somebody, you want permission to acknowledge it. A long pause. Then Marilyn said, I don't answer to your script. I answer to the system you tried to manipulate. The overhead chime sounded. Elena's voice filled Marilyn's earpiece. Zurich, JFK, Heathrow, and Narita have confirmed. Ventura Sky's clearance credentials suspended. Emergency compliance audit activated. All Tier 3 flagged personnel are subject to review. Marilyn replied. Copy. Have you logged Melissa's direct escalation and terminology? Logged, transcribed, and submitted. FAA has been pinged. Marilyn didn't look at Melissa. She didn't need to. Across the aisle, row 3C fidgeted again. Mr. Platinum lapel pin had sweat blooming along his hairline. He muttered, This is insane. She can't just… Marilyn cut in, calmly, without turning her head. I didn't just do anything. I designed the response you triggered. The man shut his mouth. Captain Hadley returned. Ma'am, he said carefully, would you be willing to verify directly? Zurich is requesting biometric confirmation from the source. Marilyn tapped her tablet twice, held up her wrist. The watch on it blinked green. A tone pinged through the cockpit, then through the crew phone, then through Zurich Control. Brendan checked the incoming data. Confirmed, he whispered. She's not only Marilyn Dorsey, she's the root-level authority on GEP Tier 3 certifications. There is no override. Melissa took a step back. Her voice was smaller now. I was just trying to follow protocol. No, Marilyn said. You were trying to enforce it on someone you believed couldn't push back. The tension in the cabin broke with a different sound. The ding of passenger devices reconnecting. But the screens were no longer showing standard flight maps. Instead, each screen read, Gate Fare Ethics Notice. This flight is under active compliance audit. Your observation matters. Passengers looked up. Some gasped, some leaned in. A woman in 5A raised her voice just enough to be heard. You mean she triggered this? The man next to her answered, Yes, and thank God someone finally did. Marilyn rose from her seat, graceful, measured. She turned to face the front of the cabin. Ventura Sky has been under GEP watch for 18 months, she said. Bias claims, ethics failures, staff training reports that never reached headquarters. Today, you saw why. Her voice wasn't angry. It was surgical. I didn't plan to be the one to trigger the freeze, but when I was told to leave my seat on a plane powered by my systems, I chose not to let that go unnoticed. She looked to Melissa. And when I was called contractor, unverified, misassigned, I chose to let the system speak instead of me. She turned to the passengers. You watched. Some of you laughed. Some stayed quiet. That's fine. I wasn't looking for defenders. I was waiting to see what kind of passengers share this space. Elena's voice returned to her earpiece. Ma'am, FAA has issued provisional suspension of Ventura Sky's Global Trust credential. Their CEO has been notified. They're requesting direct contact. Marilyn smiled faintly. Tell them they're late. From the rear of the cabin, a young Latina mother stood up. She cradled a baby in one arm, but her eyes were fierce. Thank you, she said, for sitting still. So the system had to move. Marilyn nodded once. You're welcome, she said. But this isn't the end. As Marilyn sat back down, passengers began to applaud. Not loud, not performative, but real. From somewhere deep in 2C, a passenger whispered, She didn't change the game. She was the game. Outside the plane, on Zurich's tarmac, 2 compliance officers waited beside a security vehicle. Inside the cabin, ethics had finally taken the cockpit. The phone call came in exactly 12 minutes after Zurich locked down Ventura Sky's flight credentials. Too late. Captain Hadley stepped forward, headset pressed tight against his right ear. It's corporate, he murmured to Brendan, his voice thick with regret. The CEO. Liv. Brendan didn't respond. He simply looked toward Marilyn, still seated, still unreadable, as if silently asking permission for the airline to catch up. Marilyn didn't blink. She didn't nod. She didn't stop them. But she didn't rise either. She didn't need to. "Put her through," Hadley said. The overhead comm buzzed to life, not through the main speakers, but the encrypted crew line. Still, the tone of the voice that came through was loud enough to bend the air. "This is Evelyn Maris, CEO of Ventura Sky. Who am I speaking with on this aircraft?" Captain Hadley cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this is Flight 221 en route from Zurich to JFK. On hold due to Tier 3 ethics suspension initiated mid-boarding." "Confirmed. I was just briefed. I want direct communication with Ms. Dorsey." Another silence. Brendan looked to Marilyn. She didn't even turn. Then she spoke. "Tell her I don't answer to calls that come 12 minutes late." Hadley hesitated. "Ms. Dorsey, she's requesting an opportunity to clarify." Marilyn stood. Finally. The whole cabin seemed to rise with her, or maybe the weight of who she was made the air adjust. She stepped slowly toward the cockpit partition, stopped just before it. "I built the gate fare protocol to identify patterns of institutional failure," she said aloud. "Not to receive apologies after the damage is done." Brendan whispered, "She can hear you." "Good," Marilyn continued, voice crisp and calm. "Ms. Maris, if you're listening, your systems failed not because they were broken, but because they were allowed to operate unchecked. The people you hired upheld bias as standard and silence as defense." The line stayed quiet. "Zurich, JFK, Heathrow, Narita, all suspended your landing clearances not because of my rank, but because of your pattern. I was just the one in the seat when your culture met consequence." Back in the cabin, passengers sat stunned. Mr. Platinum Pin was ghost white. Melissa stood by the galley, arms crossed tightly against her chest, lips thin with dread. No one clapped, no one moved. The weight of Marilyn's words had turned gravity itself into witness. The crew phone beeped again. This time, it was Elena. "Ms. Dorsey, corporate just issued a request to begin emergency mediation through the Ethics Council. Ventura Sky is attempting to preempt further damage." Marilyn didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched. "Let them try." She tapped her tablet once. A soft green pulse lit up. "Send them the data logs from this flight. Every word, every silence, every decision that led to this moment." Elena responded. "Transmitting now. FAA and ICAO in copy." Then another voice, a woman, older, from 6C. She spoke softly, but the cabin carried her words forward like wind through an empty church. "I flew this airline for 20 years. Watched it go from luxury to layers of polite dismissal. Never thought I'd see the day someone finally said it out loud." Marilyn looked over, met her eyes, nodded. "You're not alone anymore." Melissa took a tentative step forward. Her voice cracked. "Miss Dorsey, if I may." Marilyn turned. "No, you may not." Melissa froze. "You may not recover your image with soft tones. You may not reverse protocol with performative grace. You may not erase what this cabin already saw." Her voice sharpened, just enough to cut. "You may only wait, because that's what everyone who's been mistreated by your system had to do. Wait to be believed." The cabin went still again, but it wasn't fear now. It was clarity. Elena's voice returned. "GEP Compliance Board has confirmed suspension of Ventura Sky's operational charter for 72 hours. All pending contracts involving government routes have been frozen. Their executive board has been summoned to an emergency hearing." Marilyn took her seat again, crossed her legs, folded her hands. "Good. Let them sweat in a room that doesn't serve champagne." A few minutes later, Captain Hadley approached again. He looked smaller than before. "Zurich has cleared us for taxiing, if you'd like to proceed." Marilyn nodded. "Let's go. Some of us have meetings to reform an industry." As she spoke, the gate fare ethics screen flashed once more on every seat. Flight cleared with override authority. Chairwoman Dorsey, Ethics Tier 3. The plane moved, but everyone on board knew. It wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a message. And the people who used to run the system had just learned who it really answered to. At exactly 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the FAA issued a Category Red notification across its internal ethics protocol grid. By 10:53, every major U.S. airline CEO had received the subject line: Immediate review. Ventura Sky compliance freeze. Gate fare Tier 3 ethics violation confirmed. And just like that, Marilyn Dorsey's quiet refusal had turned into the loudest industry reckoning in a decade. The plane hadn't even reached its gate at JFK when the ripple effect began. Marilyn remained seated. She was reading, not news articles or commentary, but official reports. Real-time updates of systemic breaches her compliance system had been tracking silently for over a year. She wasn't reacting. She was confirming. Across the terminal, reporters scrambled, but the real panic wasn't in the headlines. It was in the boardrooms. At FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Director Lawrence Edmonds stared at the ethics panel's emergency dashboard. "She actually triggered it," he whispered. "A full Tier 3 freeze." His deputy replied, "And the kicker? She didn't use a title. She used the system." Lawrence nodded. "This isn't just about Ventura Sky anymore. It's about every airline that gambled on silence." At ICAO in Montreal, the International Civil Aviation Organization activated its Cross-Regional Compliance Council. An emergency meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. 3 names topped the priority list: Marilyn Dorsey, Gate Fare Protocol Path Sync Behavioral Records System. Inside JFK, Marilyn finally disembarked. No cameras, no entourage, just a single black carry-on and a digital badge still blinking green on her wrist. The gate agents straightened when they saw her, but she didn't make eye contact. She wasn't here to scold. She was here to be seen. Outside the airport, her car was waiting. Elena's voice came through the internal comm as soon as the doors closed. "FAA has just declared Ventura Sky a temporary high-risk operator. They've grounded all international departures for 72 hours. Domestic flights under review." Marilyn tapped her temple. "And ICAO?" "Sending advisory to 19 member countries. Several are expected to mirror the suspension. Heathrow already confirmed." Marilyn leaned back, closed her eyes for just a second. "Good. Let's move to Phase 2. Phase 2 wasn't dramatic. It was precise. At 11:10 a.m., the ethics team at PathSync sent secure packets of behavioral data to the FAA, ICAO, and 5 corporate ethics watchdogs. Each packet included time-stamped recordings of Ventura Sky internal crew briefings, Melissa's pre-flight notes referencing third-party class passengers' audio of Brendan's hesitation before confirmation, passenger behavior overlays. The story was no longer anecdotal. It was engineered. On social media, news began to trickle. First, a whisper on aviation boards. Did Marilyn Dorsey really ground Ventura? Then, a surge on ethics advocacy networks. Gate fare protocol activated. System freeze confirmed. #FlyFair. And by 12:03 p.m., a trending headline: Black CEO denied service on her own plane. Now the entire industry faces a reckoning. Some reactions were predictable. Ventura Sky released a statement: "We regret the misunderstanding and are cooperating fully with federal review." It lasted 6 hours before being replaced with, "Our CEO has stepped down. We're restructuring our ethics framework under GEP guidance." But not everyone scrambled. Some watched and took notes. Delta requested a private meeting with GAP. United opened talks to license PathSync across all premium international routes. And one small but growing airline, Aurora Skies, offered Marilyn a seat on their ethics advisory board. By midnight, their stock had risen 8.4%. Back in Marilyn's private residence in Westchester, her team debriefed. Elena projected a dashboard. 4 airlines under review, 12 airports requesting GEP consultation, 3 international ethics boards requesting PathSync integration. Marilyn stared at the numbers, then at her team. "This isn't about vengeance," she said. "This is about visibility." Elena nodded. "We've initiated documentation for the Gate Fare Expansion Act. FAA will require mandatory ethics training and gate fare certification for all flight crew by next fiscal quarter." Marilyn walked to the window. New York skyline in the distance. "It took a humiliation," she murmured. "But now they see it." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She picked up. "This is Marilyn," a man's voice. Calm. Measured. "Chairwoman Dorsey, this is Director Edmonds from the FAA. I wanted to say, we support what you're doing. Officially. We'll issue a national directive by Monday." Marilyn closed her eyes for just a moment. "Then it begins," she replied. As the call ended, her screen lit up with one more message. "Gate Fare Protocol Tier 3 confirmed. National compliance threshold achieved." Marilyn smiled. Silence may have started the fire, but now, everyone had to listen. The Federal Aviation Ethics Council didn't meet in flashy buildings. It met in a windowless chamber 3 stories beneath the Capitol, and at 9:00 a.m. on Thursday morning. That room wasn't just full, it was pressurized. Every seat was taken, every monitor lit, every coffee untouched, because everyone knew what was coming and who was coming. Marilyn Dorsey stepped in wearing a slate gray suit, unbranded, understated. Her shoulders carried no ornamentation, but her presence silenced 3 senators mid-whisper. Elena followed behind her, carrying a slim black case. No entourage, no lawyers, just data and intention. Senator Caldwell tapped the mic. "This hearing is now in session. The committee recognizes Chairwoman Marilyn Dorsey of the Global Ethics Panel and CEO of PathSync Technologies." Marilyn didn't flinch. She adjusted the mic slightly. "I'm not here as CEO," she said. "I'm here as a passenger who built a system to track who gets believed and who doesn't at 30,000 feet. The room paused. Even the translators in the ICAO booth held their breath. Senator Marquez, who had long lobbied for privatized aviation oversight, leaned forward. "Ms. Dorsey, some have accused this protocol of being punitive. A private citizen with the power to freeze fleets. What do you say to that?" Marilyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I say this. When public systems fail to prevent discrimination, it is the duty of private actors to create accountability, not revenge, standards." She opened the case. Elena pulled up a projection on the screen. It displayed a heat map, bias incidents, filed and unfiled, across 22 airlines over the past 3 years. Then a second slide, passenger silence rates, meaning how often witnesses said nothing when abuse happened. Then a third, post-incident promotions of staff with unresolved violations. The colors darkened. So did the room. Marilyn continued. "We didn't just build a protocol. We built visibility. Every airline was informed. Every one of them chose to ignore us until it cost them money." She tapped again. "Until Ventura Sky." Senator Liang asked gently, "And what do you propose now?" Marilyn stood taller. "I propose adoption of the Gate Fare Protocol as a national prerequisite for international airline operation. I propose we standardize ethics ratings the same way we certify safety." She took a breath. "And I propose we finally stop pretending that discrimination in the sky is anecdotal." A murmur rolled across the chamber. ICAO delegates nodded silently. FAA Director Edmonds leaned forward, then pressed a button. "The FAA supports full adoption. Effective immediately, we recommend implementation of gate fare as part of the U.S. Aviation Ethics Charter." A click. Formal. A second murmur. Louder. But one voice remained skeptical. An industry rep from Northern Glide Airlines raised his hand. "Would this create operational delays?" What happens if a flight's captain is flagged mid-rotation? Elena answered this one. If a captain is flagged, the same protocol that removes a pilot for intoxication applies. Ground crew is notified. Aircraft reassigned. Passenger safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Another rep asked, "Is this retroactive?" Marilyn responded, "Only in the sense that history never forgets. The system doesn't punish, it prevents." 3 hours in, a vote was called. The committee chair stood. All members in favor of adopting the gate fare protocol as part of the National Airline Compliance Framework, raise your hand. One by one, the hands rose. FAA, ICAO, senators, even Delta. Only 2 abstained. None voted no. A second vote followed. To mandate path-sync behavioral tracking across all domestic and international U.S. carriers by fiscal year end. That passed 2. Unanimous. The chairman turned to Marilyn. "Chairwoman Dorsey, you may consider the system ratified." She nodded once, then said, "This isn't about me. It's about every passenger who ever sat in silence because the system made them feel small. Today, that system answers to them." After the hearing, she walked out without press, but word moved faster than cameras ever could. The ticker on financial networks scrolled. FAA ratifies gate fare. Ethics certification now required across industry. Stock in Ventura's competitors rose. Aurora Skies announced a campaign called Fare Takes Flight. And somewhere in a quiet office, Evelyn Maris was no longer CEO. That night, Marilyn stood in her garden. She didn't speak, didn't post. She just watched the sky, knowing she'd helped change what it meant to fly through it. By Monday morning, what had once been industry rumor had become unshakable law. Gate fare wasn't a choice anymore. In the corporate headquarters of 11 different airlines, emergency ethics panels convened, most for the first time in company history. CEO memos were no longer optional. They were legal responses. Gate fare protocol compliance packets arrived stamped and sealed from the FAA, each marked mandatory, behavioral alignment certification required by Q4. And for the first time, airlines couldn't brush it off. Because this time, Wall Street was watching too. On CNBC, the headline scrolled, "Ethics pressure tanks Ventura stock 19%, competitors rushing to license gate fare." In boardrooms across Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas, executives scrambled. Is PathSync scalable? Will GEP audit us next? Which flights are most at risk of non-compliance? One answer kept returning. We should have acted sooner. Meanwhile, PathSync's Westchester headquarters was humming with precision. Elena coordinated 3 task forces: deployment team for airline-side integration, real-time ethics anomaly detection AI, international compliance partnership expansion. Marilyn reviewed each one personally. Her silence wasn't absence, it was control. By Wednesday, Delta and United publicly confirmed integration of gate fare across all international and premium routes. JetBlue quietly signed a licensing deal with PathSync for behavioral monitoring. Aurora Skies went further, launching a passenger education campaign titled Ethics Isn't Extra. They offered gate fare certified seating zones, and within 48 hours, bookings surged. But for Ventura Sky, there was no campaign, only consequences. FAA suspended their Tokyo, Seoul, and London routes. Heathrow Airport placed them on ethics probation. GEP downgraded their compliance score to Tier 4, at risk. And their new interim CEO, forced to testify before an emergency subcommittee on aviation justice. He used Marilyn's name 4 times. Each time, it sounded like an apology. Inside the White House press room, a spokesperson addressed the change. "We commend the FAA and Chairwoman Dorsey for raising industry standards. No passenger should ever wonder if fairness stops at the gate." The room clapped, even the skeptical reporters. On the ground, passengers were noticing. Flights now began with 2 messages. "Welcome aboard. This flight is gate fare certified. Your dignity is non-negotiable. All interactions are monitored under PathSync's ethics assurance system. Flight attendants now wore digital tags. Green meant cleared. Yellow meant under review. Gate agents received real-time prompts if bias complaints had been filed in the last 90 days. The air felt different, not perfect, but accountable. In Los Angeles, a black woman in business class was offered help with her bag without being second-guessed. In Houston, a teen boy on his first solo trip got an apology when his seat assignment was mishandled. In Miami, a Sikh passenger was addressed correctly by name and not subjected to random screening. Small shifts, but visible ones. At PathSync's next internal review, Elena ran the metrics. Complaints down 32%, positive feedback up 57%, incident resolutions within 48 hours, 89%. Marilyn didn't celebrate. She asked one question: is it replicable? Elena nodded. With the right partners, yes. A week later, ICAO announced it would integrate Gatefare into its global ethics framework for civil aviation. 19 countries committed to piloting the protocol across their top national carriers. Marilyn was invited to co-chair the committee. She declined. "I'm not here for the title. I'm here for the signal." A month after the JFK flight, Ventura Sky's stock plummeted another 11%. They attempted a PR campaign. It flopped. Because passengers weren't interested in apologies anymore. They wanted assurance, and Marilyn had already built it. The Gatefare protocol went live globally on October 1st. Passengers now receive transparency reports after each flight. They could rate interactions not just for politeness, but fairness. And their feedback directly influenced the crew's ethics rating. One line topped the new app interface: "You have the right to be treated with dignity, and now we measure it." Back in Westchester, Marilyn sat alone in her study. She pulled up a flight dashboard. JFK to San Francisco. Crew, Gatefare certified. Bias alerts, 0. Passenger complaints, 0. She smiled faintly. She wasn't trying to change the skies. She already had. When the Gatefare protocol launched globally on October 1st, the skies felt different. Not just for Americans, not just for frequent flyers, but for anyone who had ever felt small in a seat they paid for. In Geneva, at a high-stakes ICAO press conference, the Secretary General said just one sentence that defined the moment. "This is not a technology milestone. It is an ethical one." 17 member nations had already signed for full integration. 32 more requested fast-tracked implementation, and for the first time, a new seat was introduced to the Global Civil Aviation Assembly, chairwoman of the Gatefare Oversight Board. But that seat remained empty, because Marilyn Dorsey hadn't accepted it. Yet. Across the globe, airlines moved faster than regulators. In Nairobi, Kenya Airways rolled out a new passenger pledge campaign: "We see you, we hear you, we fly with you." In Berlin, Lufthansa published its first-ever transparency report listing passenger treatment metrics by race, gender, and disability. In Sao Paulo, Azul Airlines committed to training 12,000 crew members using PathSync-certified ethics modules before year-end. Media headlines coined a name for the sudden wave of reform: the Dorsey Doctrine. Marilyn never acknowledged it. She didn't have to. The system was working. Meanwhile, she stayed far from cameras. No interviews, no press briefings. Just a quiet week in Morocco, watching planes take off from a corner of the Marrakesh Menara Airport lounge. From her seat, she noticed a young flight attendant pause before approaching an older woman struggling with her carry-on. The attendant tapped her wrist tablet, reviewed the real-time ethics prompts, and without hesitation, stepped forward. "Thank you for flying with us. Please, let me help." She smiled. The woman relaxed. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary. To Marilyn, it meant everything. The culture was shifting, and no one even needed to say her name. Back in Washington, the U.S. Congress drafted the Aviation Ethics Act, pushing to transform Gatefare from an FAA executive standard into federal law. Surprisingly, bipartisan support surged. It wasn't political. It was moral. Polling showed 78% of Americans supported the move. Airline lobbyists were suddenly quiet. Their customers had already voted with their wallets. One evening, when Marilyn returned to Westchester, her assistant Derek greeted her with a plain white box. 6 countries, dozens of letters, he said. She opened it slowly. Inside, a folded boarding pass with a handwritten note. "Thank you for making my mother feel safe." A crayon drawing from a child. "I got to sit with Dad this time." A flight log. "We de-escalated before it escalated. Gate fare saved this flight." Marilyn read each one. She didn't post them online, didn't display them on her walls, but she placed them all in a single red folder labeled Impact, and she kept it close. Then came the invitation she couldn't ignore. The Global Ethics in Transit Summit, Singapore. November 18th. This time, she said yes. When she stepped onto the stage, there were no opening remarks. Just 3,000 people standing in silence. Diplomats, airline CEOs, survivors of public transport discrimination, policy analysts, activists. She paused, then began. "I'm not here as a CEO or a chairwoman. I'm here as a woman who was told she didn't belong in a seat she owned. And I'm here because none of you should ever hear those words again." The room exhaled, then applauded. Her speech wasn't long, but it cut deep. She spoke of metrics and fairness, of dignity as a service standard, of silence, not as peace, but as a weapon, and how we could redesign systems that no longer required shouting to be heard. She ended with one sentence. "Power isn't about speaking louder. It's about making space so others can finally speak." By the end of the summit, 11 countries signed the Multimodal Dignity Accord, pledging to integrate gate fare into trains, ferries, and even border control systems. Several more committed to auditing their transport hubs using the PathSync model. What began on one plane had now spread to ships, tunnels, terminals, and checkpoints. Meanwhile, Ventura Sky quietly sold 22% of its stake to Aurora Skies, a growing ethical aviation brand. The acquisition contract required one clause: full gate fare integration in 90 days. By December, Evelyn Maris's name was wiped from all Ventura boardrooms. The press didn't cover it, but passengers noticed, and so did Wall Street. Aurora's stock rose 8%. Ventura's stabilized, not from PR, from accountability. That winter, Marilyn received one final envelope, no return address, one card, one sentence. "I was on that flight. I stayed silent. I'll never do that again. Thank you." She folded the note, held it in her hands, then said softly, "That's why we built it." That night, as stars shimmered over her garden, she looked up and saw a jet trail cut across the sky. She didn't know the airline, didn't need to, because someone on that plane had rights. And this time, the system would defend them. It started with a note taped to a door. "As of January 1st, I will step down as chair of the Gate Fare Oversight Board. The system doesn't need my name anymore. It belongs to the people now. Marilyn Dorsey." No press release, no farewell interview, no social media post, just one quiet memo posted on the bulletin board inside the Geneva Ethics Commission. It went viral anyway, not because she left, but because she left at the exact moment everyone assumed she'd want to stay. For weeks, people speculated. Is she sick? Was there a political fight? Is she running for office? But those closest to Marilyn knew better. She wasn't disappearing. She was disappearing on purpose. In her final closed-door address to the board, she said it simply. "Systems must survive without personality cults. We didn't build this to celebrate a face. We built it so no one would need to raise their voice to be treated with dignity." The silence after her words said it all. Half the room had tears in their eyes. The other half took notes, knowing she wouldn't speak like this again. By then, the Gate Fare AI dashboard had already been adopted in 61 countries, running live in 234 airports, 90 train networks, and 7 major ferry systems. It scored interactions in real time, logged ethics violations without bias, flagged escalations before they happened. But more than anything, it earned trust. In India, an 82-year-old man boarded a regional flight in Pune. He had trouble walking. The gate fare system flagged his need discreetly, and 3 staff members adjusted their protocol. No fuss, no delay. The man's daughter, a cardiologist, posted online, "He wasn't made to feel like a burden. That's worth more than a seat upgrade." At the same time, new names were rising. Dr. Ayanna Farrell, a former legal counsel for the Chicago Transit Authority, was appointed as the new Global Oversight Director. Ayanna was only 38, sharp, focused, and unapologetic. Her first action: implement gate fare's satellite protocol across refugee transit hubs in Eastern Europe. Not glamorous, not headline-worthy, but crucial. She didn't try to be the next Marilyn. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, PathSync, the infrastructure platform that powered GateFare, went open source. Under a Creative Commons license, cities like Jakarta, Dakar, and Prague customized their own versions, adapting not only for air, but for subways, border stations, even rideshare networks. And for the first time, a unified passenger dignity score became part of travel apps. You could check how your airline, train line, or even port ranked before you booked a ticket. Back in New York, Marilyn wasn't idle. She quietly returned to consulting, this time for free. No logos, no TV interviews, just advising ethics engineers, auditing code, and doing late-night Zoom calls with Ghana's Ministry of Transport. When asked why she wouldn't take credit, she smiled. Because the moment you need credit, you stop creating systems that outlast you. One evening, Ayanna called her. "The summit in Copenhagen, can you at least attend? You don't have to speak." Marilyn paused. She was watching a boy help his grandmother board a bus in Yonkers. The driver waited patiently. The interface light on the panel blinked green. GateFare in action. She smiled. "No, I don't need to attend. But tell them this. The system isn't mine. It's yours now. Run it better than I ever did." Then she hung up. Later that week, a documentary titled Flight Rights: The GateFare Story aired globally. It showed the footage from her original flight, the one where it all began. The humiliation, the silence, the single phone call. Then the chaos that followed, and the justice that outlasted it. The final scene showed passengers now boarding peacefully from LAX to Lagos. No one yelling, no one shamed, just quiet dignity. The narrator's final line was simple. She made one call, but the world kept answering. In spring, Marilyn walked through JFK Terminal 5, completely unnoticed. She passed a gate agent helping a nervous teenage girl find her gate. "Take your time, sweetie. We've got you," the agent said. No performative politeness, no cameras, just policy, just respect. Marilyn nodded to herself. She had no titles now, no official power, and yet, somehow, this was the most powerful she'd ever felt. She boarded her flight quietly. Middle seat, coach. She didn't ask for more. The man beside her helped her stow her bag. The woman across the aisle offered a mint. As the plane lifted off, a notification pinged on her phone. "GateFare now live in 100 countries." She turned it off, looked out the window, and whispered, "Now, let's see how far it can fly." In the months following Marilyn Dorsey's quiet exit, something rare began to unfold in the aviation industry. Not a policy shift, not a PR stunt, but a full-blown ethical transformation. The ripple she left behind had become a current, and that current turned into a global wave. What started as a single protocol created out of humiliation, GateFare, was now being embraced as the global gold standard for fairness in the skies. At the FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., The General Aviation Governance Summit looked more like a world conference. Delegates from 82 countries gathered. Media vans lined the sidewalks. Protesters and supporters both showed up, but all eyes were on one banner hanging above the entryway. Passenger dignity is not optional. The keynote speaker wasn't a senator or executive. It wasn't Marilyn, and it wasn't Ayanna. It was a 15-year-old girl named Kayla Bright. She had gone viral 2 months earlier after posting a video explaining how gate fare had helped her autistic brother avoid a full-blown meltdown during a turbulent flight. The system had alerted the crew in advance, provided step-by-step support protocols, and most importantly, treated her brother as a person, not a problem. Kayla stood on that stage, holding a folded piece of paper. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply said, "Gate fare didn't save the flight. It saved my brother's dignity." That sentence cut through the bureaucracy like a blade. By the time she finished, the entire room, policymakers, CEOs, veterans, were on their feet. Behind the curtain, FAA Administrator Marcia Ellison and ICAO's Global Ethics Task Force had already spent 6 months working side by side to draft a document no one saw coming: the Passenger Fairness Mandate. The mandate stated clearly, any airline flying into or over U.S. or UN-affiliated airspace must implement a gate fare-compatible ethics system. Period. No certification, no access. The mandate included live behavioral monitoring dashboards, public ethics scorecards per crew, and airport transparent reporting of all passenger disputes and resolutions. Ethics training certified by GateFare for every flight crew. By July, the U.S. Senate passed the bill. By August, 126 UN-affiliated nations co-signed. By September, every major airline began the scramble to comply. A few held out. Small regional carriers said they couldn't afford the tech. Until Veritas Capital, the global fund managing over $1.1 trillion in transportation assets, made its own announcement. They would no longer fund, insure, or partner with any airline that refused gate fare compliance. Within days, 3 airlines were delisted from major stock exchanges. Leases were canceled, airport gates revoked, flight paths reassigned. Within a week, even the most resistant CEOs caved. The system had changed. And Marilyn? She had disappeared from the press. No interviews, no public statements. But her name showed up somewhere else. Across social media, airline staff began using the hashtag #HatNoVoiceRaised every time gate fare was adopted at a new location. Soon, it was trending in 11 countries. Then 28. Flight unions, once skeptical, began requesting gate fare training. Ground crews who'd spent decades afraid to speak up now had a reporting tool that protected them. Former passengers came forward with letters, stories they never thought mattered, but now finally did. Gate fare wasn't just a system. It had become a mirror. In Europe, Heathrow and Charles de Gaulle both adopted gate fare within 48 hours of each other. In Asia, Narita and Changi airports issued a joint statement. Gate fare will be our standard for international dignity. In Africa, Cape Town International saw a 40% improvement in elderly passenger satisfaction within just 6 weeks. In Australia, Melbourne's regional buses piloted gate fare with disabled riders. Complaints dropped by 64%. In Brazil, an airline that tried to create its own version of gate fare was publicly blacklisted by the ICAO for ethics manipulation. Their flights were grounded. Their stock dropped 19%. Gate fare wasn't just an initiative anymore. It was global infrastructure. 1 year after Marilyn resigned, she was invited to the International Transport Equity Forum in Stockholm. She politely declined, but she sent a handwritten letter which was read aloud at the closing ceremony. I never wanted a legacy. I wanted a system that worked without raising voices. If we have that now, then let my name disappear and let the standard endure. No one clapped. They stood. And for 60 seconds, they said nothing. Because some victories aren't loud, they're permanent. By the end of the fiscal year, Gatefare was live in 126 countries. The FAA integrated it into all federal airline contracts. ICAO made it a condition for international airspace access. 3 high-speed rail systems adopted it voluntarily. Maritime transport regulators requested integration standards. Law schools began teaching its policy framework. Autonomous vehicle developers requested ethical modeling based on Gatefare's scoring logic. Insurance agencies rewrote risk assessment models. Even Uber and Lyft requested adaptation kits for high-value executive routes. The quiet system born on one plane had begun shaping how every vehicle, on land, sea, and air, would treat the people inside. Tiana Reynolds, a former Gatefare intern, now ran the Ethics Ops division at JFK Airport. When NPR asked her why the system mattered, she answered, "It gave us language. It gave us boundaries. But more than anything, it gave us accountability with dignity." In Los Angeles, someone painted a mural on the side of Terminal 6. It wasn't of Marilyn, just an empty first-class seat. And underneath, "Everyone deserves this space." Marilyn now spent her days gardening, tending orchids, reading mystery novels. One day, her neighbor, a young mom who worked nights as a flight attendant, asked if she missed being famous. Marilyn smiled, then glanced at the sky as a jet passed silently overhead. "I don't need to be known," she said. "I just need to know that the system stayed honest." She didn't ask where the flight was going. She didn't care who was on board. Because she already knew what mattered most, that on that plane, no voice had to rise to be heard. No one had to plead to be respected. And wherever it landed, dignity arrived first. It began with a seat. Not one carved from mahogany, not one wrapped in platinum leather. Just a regular first-class seat on a regular plane, the one that Marilyn Dorsey had once been denied. Now, it was encased in glass. Not in a museum, not in a boardroom, but in the International Passenger Ethics Hall, a new section inside the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Next to it, a simple plaque read, "The day the quiet changed everything." It didn't mention Marilyn by name. It didn't need to, because by now, the world knew the story. In the years since the Gatefare protocol had gone global, the airline industry had seen a transformation unlike anything in its history. But the true legacy didn't lie in regulations or market reports. It lived in people. Like Amira Liu, a junior flight attendant in Singapore who had once been written up for smiling too little. Under Gatefare, her professional behavior was recognized, not penalized. She eventually became one of the first cabin ethics advisors in Asia. Or Alejandro Martinez, a 78-year-old grandfather who'd spent years being overlooked in boarding queues due to his age. On a trip to visit his great-grandchild in Mexico City, Gatefare prompted a proactive mobility assistant to meet him at the gate. For the first time in decades, he told his daughter he felt seen again. And then there was Dion West, a second-year law student from Howard University, whose mother had been harassed by airline staff years earlier and never reported it. Dion now stood on the steps of the Supreme Court, having helped draft the Global Passenger Fairness Accord, the first international agreement to codify transit dignity as a human right. She didn't wear a robe, just a suit. Navy blue, like Marilyn's that day. Her closing argument was simple. You don't get to silence the person in seat 3A ever again. The courtroom fell silent. The justices approved the bill, 9-0. Elsewhere, at JFK International, a bronze sculpture was unveiled near the Delta terminal. It wasn't a person. It was a pair of open hands, palms up, holding nothing. Inscribed beneath it, "This is how respect begins." The crowd included flight attendants, airline executives, human rights activists, and 2 unexpected guests, the daughters of the flight attendant who once denied Marilyn service. They stood quietly. No cameras, no speeches. When asked by a reporter why they came, the older sister replied, "Because sometimes the apology comes from the next generation." Marilyn never returned to public life. She refused a book deal, ignored film offers, declined every interview request. She said everything she needed to say through silence and structure. She continued consulting behind the scenes, anonymously helping other industries apply Gatefare's scoring system to ride-share services, cruise lines, even hospital triage systems. The core philosophy stayed the same. No voice raised, no dignity denied. But time, as always, moved on. 3 years after the Gatefare mandate passed, a new controversy emerged. A luxury train company in Europe quietly began allowing anonymous complaints from VIP travelers, bypassing the ethics score of standard passengers. The backlash was immediate. The system flagged itself, and within 36 hours, Veritas Capital suspended the company's ESG rating and froze $280 million in infrastructure credit. Gatefare had become more than software. It was now a sentinel, coded to correct injustice without waiting for a human hand to act. This time, no CEO had to make a call. The call had already been built into the system. At a quiet coffee shop in Sonoma, California, a young reporter from The Atlantic finally tracked Marilyn down. He didn't ask for an interview, just a conversation. She agreed, under one condition: no recording. She sipped her coffee, gazing out at the vineyard. He asked her, softly, "Do you ever think about that flight? The one that started it all?" Marilyn smiled faintly. "Every day," she said. "Not because of what they did to me, but because of what I chose not to do back." The reporter leaned in. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes. "Anyone can yell, but very few people build something so no one has to yell again." He didn't write it down, but he never forgot it. In the years that followed, the Gatefare protocol expanded beyond transit. It became the foundation for the civic ethics operating system, adopted in schools' emergency rooms, public housing departments, corporate customer service systems. The algorithm was licensed not for profit, but for purpose. And at the center of every application was a simple, silent principle: the first to be dismissed must be the first to be protected. One day, at a high school in Detroit, a student named Isaiah Bell gave a presentation about the evolution of transportation ethics. His mother had once been denied boarding on a flight because her prosthetics set off a metal detector. She never forgot the humiliation. Now, thanks to Gatefare, Isaiah's family could travel without fear. His final slide showed the photo of that encased first-class seat in the Smithsonian. "People call it the seat that changed everything," he said. "But really, it's the seat that reminded us that everyone matters, even when they're sitting quietly." The auditorium erupted into applause. On her 56th birthday, Marilyn received a single letter in the mail. No return address, no fanfare. Just a note card, handwritten, that read, "I used to dread boarding. Now I breathe easy. You don't know me, but you saw me. Thank you." She placed it in a drawer with 5 others like it. She didn't need a museum. She had her reminder. And then, as always, the world moved forward. Planes kept flying. People kept boarding. Not all problems disappeared. But one thing had changed. Silence was no longer invisibility, and power no longer came from raising your voice, but from designing a world where no one had to. Because in every cabin, on every route, for every passenger, the seat remained. But that seat, it never flew again. It wasn't made for more miles. It was made for memory. And across the globe, replicas of that same seat began showing up, not as museum pieces, but as commitments. In Buenos Aires, Aerolíneas Argentinas installed one at their training center. Next to it hung a sign: "You don't train for turbulence, you train for dignity." In Nairobi, Kenya Airways created a traveling exhibit for schools, teaching kids the meaning of fairness, not as a reward, but a right. In Seoul, an airline used a modified version of Gatefare to train their call center staff, redefining customer service from resolution to prevention. And in a small airport in Iceland, a retired captain named Erik Olafsson built his own wooden replica of the seat and placed it by the arrivals gate. No plaque, no camera. When asked why, he said simply, "Because I flew for 30 years. I know how easy it is to forget people once the door closes." Meanwhile, in policy circles, the ripple effects hadn't stopped. Major governments began embedding gate fare principles into broader transit legislation. The European Commission created a sub-department on passenger dignity rights. Canada included the system as part of its National Infrastructure Trust standards. In the US, local transit agencies in Chicago and Boston began beta testing gate fare for city buses and subway systems. The early results? 28% drop in commuter complaints, 36% increase in rider confidence, 41% boost in staff morale, and perhaps most telling, for the first time ever, passengers began submitting positive feedback on driver kindness, unsolicited. In corporate America, things shifted too. Executives who once rolled their eyes at ethics platforms were now investing in them, not because it made them look good, but because the data proved it worked. Turnover rates dropped, brand loyalty rose, even lawsuits decreased. Gate fare wasn't woke tech, it was working infrastructure, and that made all the difference. But Marilyn never claimed credit. When asked by a friend why she didn't trademark her name next to the system, she just shrugged. Because the point isn't my name on a product, it's no name being shouted on a plane. And quietly, the culture began to change. Flight crews who once rolled their eyes at complaints began listening deeper. Supervisors who used to prioritize efficiency started asking better questions like, "How do you think the passenger felt when that happened? Was this reaction about a policy or about power?" The shift wasn't seismic, it was systemic. And that was enough. On the second anniversary of the gate fare launch, dozens of airports participated in a symbolic gesture. At 12 o'clock local time, every terminal in 73 countries made a 1-minute announcement. Not a drill, not a test, just one sentence, broadcasted in local languages. "We see you, we hear you, and you matter." People cried. Others stood still mid-check-in. Some clapped, but mostly, the world paused. Together. For a minute, every single traveler, rich or poor, elderly or young, business class or standby, shared the same message. And somewhere in Sonoma, Marilyn heard it too. Her neighbor, curious, had asked, "Did you hear that airport thing just now?" Marilyn only nodded. She didn't say anything, but later that night she opened her notebook and wrote 4 words on a blank page. It finally landed right. Have you ever been ignored in a place you paid to be treated with dignity? Maybe at an airport, a restaurant, or even on a plane? Tell us where you're watching from, and whether you've ever felt invisible in a place that should have made you feel seen. When the pilot got the emergency call from Zurich Control, he didn't realize it came from the woman quietly seated in 3A. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't filmed a single second. She hadn't even stood up. She had simply pressed one button. And 5 minutes later, 4 international airports suspended Ventura Sky. But it didn't start with a phone call. It started with this: "You need to move. This section is for Executive Plus clients only." Before we go deeper, tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever been told, subtly or loudly, that you didn't belong? Because in this story, one woman's silence was louder than everyone else's ego combined. Marilyn Dorsey didn't flinch. She looked up from her window seat. 3A, first class, priority boarded, confirmed. She gave Melissa Grant, the lead flight attendant, a long, calm blink. Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her posture screamed authority, but her tone carried something colder, dismissal dressed as policy. "You're listed under a contractor's booking group," Melissa said. "Your seat may have been auto-assigned wrong. We need you to return to the standard business class cabin." That word again. Contractor. Marilyn didn't react. She had worn what she always wore on travel days. Black flats, tailored charcoal slacks, a navy knit blouse with 0 logos or labels. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, and apparently, nothing that said power. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be," she said evenly. Melissa's eyes flicked to the tablet in her hand. She didn't even bother looking at Marilyn's boarding pass. Across the aisle, a white man in an expensive-looking blazer smirked at his companion. "She probably slipped up here during boarding. Maintenance folks try that trick all the time," he whispered. Not quietly enough. Marilyn heard it. She always did. It didn't matter that she'd built a billion-dollar tech empire. Didn't matter that the jet they were sitting in used routing systems her company designed. Didn't matter that she was on the board of the International Aviation Ethics Council. She was still a black woman, dressed simply, sitting in a seat most people didn't believe she'd paid for. Melissa leaned closer. "We've had problems lately with third-party bookings being misassigned. It's not personal. Of course not. It never is. It's always policy. Procedure. Nothing personal. Just a shrug and a smile over a knife." A younger flight attendant hovered nearby, holding a tray of pre-departure champagne. She skipped Marilyn's row entirely. A man behind her cleared his throat. Loudly. "She's slowing us down. This flight needs to leave." Melissa's voice dropped half an octave. "If you'd like to avoid a scene, I suggest cooperating before we involve security." Still seated, Marilyn tilted her head. "You've already created a scene." Melissa blinked. "Excuse me? You're just hoping I'll be the one to escalate it." She could feel it happening. The energy in the cabin had shifted. Every glance was either hostile or avoiding. Every silence was loaded. The man in 3C, slicked hair, platinum lapel pin, folded his arms and laughed quietly to himself. "You people really do like to push it, don't you?" he said. That was the moment. You people. There it was. No more dressing it up. No more policy or procedure. Now it was just plain, simple bias. Marilyn let her fingers brush the edge of her tablet case. She opened it, slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. Because she did. Because they didn't. "Ma'am, I'm calling in your removal," Melissa said, stepping toward the crew phone. That's when Marilyn spoke. Not loud, not fast, just steady. "Before you do that, you should know something. I'm not the problem here. Your airline is." Melissa froze mid-step. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, followed immediately by disbelief. Marilyn tapped a discrete icon on her tablet screen. A quiet tone chirped in her earpiece. A voice followed. "Ms. Dorsey, this is Elena. Path sync node confirmed. Tier 3 escalation protocol is ready." Marilyn's voice remained calm, still grounded. "Initiate the lockdown. Begin Zurich chain. Mark Ventura Sky as non-compliant. Confirmed." Outside the window, nothing seemed to change. But inside the cockpit, red lights began to blink. At JFK, a routing delay alert flagged. At Heathrow, a compliance freeze locked Ventura's landing gate access. At Narita, automated clearance protocols halted mid-transmission. At Zurich, home base for the flight, control officers stared at their screens as Ventura Sky was flagged under ethics review. All within 5 minutes. But back in 3A, Marilyn didn't move. She folded her hands again and watched Melissa's face pale as the crew phone lit up with a Zurich number. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't filming. She wasn't even smiling. Because she didn't have to. The system she built was already speaking for her. Melissa didn't know what just happened.